Well, welcome to the Midweek, everyone. My name is Judy West. I'm one of the pastors at The Crossing. Typically, Angela Bice is the co-host with Tim, but she is on vacation this week. So the team asked if I would like to co-host with him, and I said, sure, it would be my honor. Now, if you are new to the Midweek, the whole goal of this is just to spend a few minutes unpacking the weekend service and then seeing, is there another level we can go, another level deeper, and help each one of us then walk away with something practical from it. Now, if you were here this past weekend, when Tim taught, there were two big illustrations that I still have in my brain. The first one was that pedestal, the column. I can still see the whole image of him interacting with it on the stage. And the whole point was that is Jesus wants to be on the pedestal of our lives. Sometimes we inadvertently knock him off and put relationships, career, ego, pride, exercise, you name it. We take Jesus off and put something else on. Well, we're supposed to. Jesus wants us to put him on that pedestal. But there was one more illustration that I think really got to a bunch of us, got to our hearts. Watch this.
You guys ever go into a room where there's like a fluorescent lights and you're in there for a long time and one of them's buzzing? You know what I'm talking about? It's the worst, right? It takes me back to my college days. Like I think about taking a test or something and there's this buzz in the room, and by the time it's done, I'm like drained. And it's not because I was taking a test, it's because that buzz would not go away. Now, the interesting thing is that whenever we start putting together our weekend services and we start preparing for people to join us, our tech team goes to great lengths to eliminate unwanted noise from our systems. Because you guys got to understand, there's tons of electronics and wires and cables and stuff that help us pull off these services every weekend, and you never know where a buzz might come from. It could be like a faulty cable or a bad instrument or a little direct box where the polarity's gotten backwards or it's grounded for some reason, and this buzz just starts to enter into it. And this tech team works so hard to eliminate it. It's impossible to get rid of all of it, but they do the best they can. And so that's why right now I'm going to ask you to pray for our tech team because they hate this illustration. Do you hear it? It's annoying, isn't it? Sometimes it's not like noise in our ears. Sometimes it's even something we can see, like on the screen. It's the worst. Here's the thing. When we look at these kinds of noises and all of this that's going on, this is exactly what I'm talking about. And we live with this kind of noise in our lives every single day. Voices in advertising, voices in entertainment, our culture, the news, the latest apocalyptic headline that popped up in your social media feed. Sometimes it's even good things that are creating sound in our lives, and it just gets to be so much. And if we're not careful, they just start to add to the noise. And I'm telling you, we need margin from these things. We need every once in a while, to maybe like once a day, maybe one day out of every week, maybe one weekend out of every month. We just need these rhythms in our lives where we say, we're going to choose to seek him, where we're going to choose to be still and open up our Bibles and listen to a different voice, to pray and to rest and to get to a place to where we finally just remove the noise. You feel that? That's better, isn't it? Jesus says, if you're tired, if you're weary, come to me and I'll give you rest.
All right. You were on stage. I was sitting in the bullpen, that front row at church.
Yes.
When you hit that foot pedal and the sound stopped, everybody had their masks on, but what did you see?
You know, I didn't see a lot, but I heard a reaction. There was like, I could hear people like let out air. In one service, a lady clapped or laughed because she was so like relieved that it was gone. So there was definitely a reaction.
I wondered if you heard it, because I did.
Yeah.
I heard people around me. There was a visceral reaction when it stopped. It's like when the nails on a chalkboard stop, and that's what people said. You don't realize, this was my point when you did that, you don't realize how much the clutter is bothering you until it's truly gone.
Right. And then when it goes away, that's a crazy release.
Relief. It was a relief. You relieved people when it was gone.
Well, it's interesting you said the word clutter, because that's the whole point, right? Is that we don't necessarily do it on purpose, but our lives just start to build up with so much busyness and so much is going on, and we really need to unplug. And then we go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, you know?
Yep.
So speaking of unplugging, we have a question we want to ask you guys as we get ready to head into our conversation for today. And answer us as quickly as you can in the comments on Facebook, okay? But here's the question. What are some ways that you unplug? Okay? That's going to lead us to a conversation on some things, but we'd love for you guys to share with us some of your answers on that. And speaking of unplugging, did you get a chance to unplug for Christmas?
It was awesome.
Wasn't
I've been
it?
talking to a bunch of staff, and something happened. I think people truly just rested after Christmas.
Yeah, when we all missed getting the opportunity to be with friends and family and all of that, but it also afforded us the opportunity to not have a lot going on.
And people rested.
Which was really nice.
Yeah, but it was a good December. I feel like God forced our hand during COVID to get really creative with December, between Garden Glow and the curbside Christmases. It was just fun. It was so different and fun.
I've heard different people talk about how it was meaningful for them in different ways, depending on which of the event they're talking about. And then there was our Christmas services, Christmas Eve, which was so holy, and the feedback I keep hearing, and we were talking about it in a meeting earlier today, is that we felt like God just kind of touched us in multiple different ways through that service.
Yep.
For me, one of those was the very end when people were holding up their signs.
Holy cow.
Oh my gosh, yeah, just to hear.
We were glued when we rewatched it, because obviously we were here to record the services when we were doing it live, but when we went home and rewatched it, I was glued to the TV. And it was emotional.
It was.
Seeing all those signs. It was like cardboard testimonies of Christmas with everybody's stories.
Well, I was here in the building too, Judy, and I laughed at myself as I was watching it because no one else was in the room. I'm watching this Christmas Eve service, and tears on my face, and I'm going, why am I still watching this? I'm like, it's over. I'm the only person here, but I wanted to see what everybody had to say. It was so good. And so God showed up in some really cool ways over this holiday, and then you and I got to hear a story over this past weekend about one of our, another way that God showed up, not just in Christmas, but over the course of this year. One of our single moms, who we just love here at the Crossing, shared the story about how really early in this COVID season, their next door neighbors who had a boy this close to the same age as her boy moved away.
Yeah.
And so now she's like, I'm isolated from my family, I'm isolated from friends, from my church, and now the one boy that my boy had to play with is no longer here. What am I going to do? And the joke we were saying this weekend is God just put a crossing family right next door. I'll bring the church to you.
Yeah.
And so this crossing family moves in next door to her, and they have a boy as well, who really, in a lot of ways, couldn't be more different than her son.
At least 4 or 5 years older, and they have just developed the sweetest friendship, she said, during this COVID time. And the one thing they both asked for Christmas was
tuxedos. I think it's so cool. They said, we want tuxedos. So check out these pictures of these two boys who got a chance to just celebrate Christmas together and look all dapper.
That's
with the
pure
snowflakes.
Friendship right there.
It totally is.
Like only God could orchestrate that. Pure friendship.
So cool. So God's on the move in some really cool ways, and now here we are in a new year. And Judy, we've got a lot of stuff coming up to be really excited about with this church. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what we can look forward to?
Make sure you're here, especially this weekend, either at one of our campuses or watching online. It's going to be a Vision Weekend with Greg, and I know some of the stuff coming from major announcements to, I'll just say the word baptism. I'll leave you with that, but you'll want to be here for that. And then the following weekend, right, he's starting a Heroes of the Faith series.
Heroes of the Faith, and so we'll talk about what it looks like to have heroic faith in really difficult times. It's going to be really helpful for all of us. So cool stuff. And then there's all of our classes are kicking off.
Classes, everything is kicking off again.
Yep, so you want to look at the calendar for that and don't miss out on those opportunities. And this is a chance to make 2021 a year where you connect with God and grow and continue to take steps in your spiritual journey, which gets us back to unplugging.
Yes.
Right? So let me, we've got some of the responses that you guys have said on Facebook, so let me just read these really quickly. One person said going for a run.
Yeah, baby.
Alone time, turning off the phone, come on. Separating and reading my word, watching a good romance movie. All right.
Chick flick.
Chick flick, nothing wrong with that. Listening to music, spending time outdoors, and heading down to a family farm. So there's some great examples there.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, Judy, as we get ready to kind of talk about the subject you're going to teach us on a little bit this evening. It's one thing to unplug, and those are great ways to unplug. But when we're talking about removing the noise and connecting with God, it's unplugging, but then
Plugging into, yes,
Right.
yes. Because it's one thing just to have something you unplug and just sit on the couch, but it's a whole other thing to say, I'm consciously going to now choose to plug into Jesus and develop my relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's what just the whole concept of the noise and then you challenging us to get into rhythms and patterns, that's why you invited me on to talk about spiritual pathways.
Spiritual pathways, which is a subject that you have taught on and been kind of passionate about for years. In fact, 13 years ago when I came on staff at The Crossing and as an intern began reporting to you, one of the very first projects that you assigned me to was to help us get our heads around how do we help people more plug into these spiritual pathways and figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
And
Well, it came
ahead.
from, I didn't grow up in a church environment, which a lot of you know about, but those of you that did, very early on my faith walk, you told me that growing up you were taught really there were three main ways to connect with God. Read the Bible, go to church, and pray.
Yep.
And then if you didn't do those three well, or, oh my gosh, I could only pray for 30 seconds, I'm a loser.
Right.
There was this almost shame and guilt over it.
There totally was, because the dilemma here is that that's how we're being told we're to connect with God. Well, when I read my Bible or when I try to pray for more than 30 seconds, I don't feel like I'm connecting with God.
Right.
So I feel guilty about that. But then outside of that time, I'm having a hard time connecting with God.
Right.
So I don't know
Right.
what to do.
Right.
Right?
And that's where, when I first learned about this concept of spiritual pathways, I embraced it. And it was literally life transforming. And so what I want to do is just spend a few minutes just doing a brief overview, if that's okay with you guys. There is a great book called Sacred Pathways by Gary Thomas. You might want to go get this if this lights an interest in you. But also, when it comes to this, the team is now going to post below a little quick, kind of like a survey, a questionnaire you can do that will start the conversation. It was developed by author and pastor John Ortberg. Give him all the credit for this. But what I want to do right now is just unpack some of them. Basically, let me just start with this. A spiritual pathway is just a way the Lord has wired you to connect with Him. That's all it is. Just as He's wired us to connect with human relationships,
Yep.
He's wired us to connect with Him in a specific way. So,
Well, and before you go through them, can I just say,
Yeah.
this isn't necessarily, you're not going to find a chapter and verse in Scripture on the spiritual pathways, but you see they're all biblical. You see them all throughout the pages of Scripture. There are different characters, like we were talking about, David. You could probably figure out what his spiritual pathway was. You can
well,
kinda go
even heroes
through.
of the faith, you could probably do a character study and in the text find out how and they connected with God.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let me just bounce off these 7 quickly, and as I say these, I want you to be doing a mental inventory. You can even grab a pencil and paper if you want and write these down, but as I said, the team is going to post this actual questionnaire for you. One of the primary ways that the Lord uses that connects you to Him is through actual relationship. If you sense the presence of God when you're in significant relationships, it might mean that's one of your primary pathways to connect with God, okay? Another one, intellectual. You know who you are. You're the first one in the bookstore and the last one to leave. You have a stack of books by your bed. You devour the Bible. You know who you are. He has wired you that way, to be a voracious reader, to connect with Him that way, okay? Worship, in the context of this, it means corporate praise, singing, okay? So those of you, you probably have 99.1 on your radio all day. You want to sit in here and listen to the music all day.
Yep.
Lots of times people with this pathway are very demonstrative.
I was going to say, I can always tell if this is somebody's pathway because they demonstrate it when they're in the room worshiping.
They're not afraid to be demonstrative. Activist, that pathway, I love this one because the Lord wires you to be a voice for those that don't have a voice. You have to somehow fight for justice. And when you do, you experience His presence. Contemplative is the silence and solitude. Those were the people in the room the other day that went,
That's right. That's
They
right.
love the silence and solitude. Too much clutter, and if there's clutter, they do not experience God.
For them, unplugging is almost enough. It's just then in the
Yes.
silence trying to figure out how to
Yep.
how to connect with God.
Serving, those of you that are wired with the spiritual pathway of serving, you put a towel over your arm, you can't help it. Because when you don't have that towel over your arm, you don't feel God with you. So you have to serve others. And then the last one is creation. You know who you are. You have to be out in nature. You see a rainbow, you tear up. You see a bird, you cry. Like there's just something, you know God's present when you're in nature. So those are 7 main ways. I don't know if you related to any of them, but typically, you know, you'll get a little
Right
hint
off the
into
bat,
right
right?
off
You
the
can
bat.
start to figure out
right
which
off the
one you think
bat.
it might be.
And going back to though, you have to be really strategic about it. I was in a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about this. And can I go forward for 2 seconds
Yeah,
and
yeah.
say, she was saying that she was feeling really almost numb and disconnected from God. So we went through spiritual pathway stuff, and her number 1 was nature. And so I said, when is the last time you were in nature? 4 months ago. No wonder.
Yeah.
That's like having a relationship and you not seeing the person for 4 months.
Well, Judy, we've been getting, in a good way, just people reaching out, pastoral conversations, and people saying, I feel stuck, I feel stale, my relationship
feel
with God feels
stale, yep.
stunted.
Yep.
And this is one of those questions we get to ask.
It's one of
right?
my first questions I ask people. Let's talk about how the Lord's wired you to connect with Him, and are you strategic with being, because on your thing you said every day, every week, every month, and you have to be that strategic. Otherwise, you're pushing Jesus off the pedestal. You're putting something else up there.
That's right. So let me ask you a couple clarifying questions. So you just listed kind of 7 categories. First of all, so just to out myself, I'm a creation pathway person. That's one of my pathways. Does that mean then that I don't experience Him in intellectual ways or contemplative ways or activistic ways?
No. Well, first of all, let's say this is a question I get all the time. Let's say the intellectual one is at the bottom. That doesn't mean you say, I don't have to read my Bible because it's my lowest pathway.
Because He still speaks to us through His Word.
He totally speaks through His Word. And sometimes that's the way He stretches us.
Yeah.
And I told you this. I've told a lot of you this. The minute I got the voice translation, I've always read the Bible, but when I found a translation that touched my heart, I went a whole nother level deeper with that pathway.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then the other question then is, am I restricted to these 7 categories? Like, is it possible that I could connect with God in another way or more specific way?
When I teach this, I go, okay, here are the 7. Now, here's the twist. How the Lord has truly, truly wired you probably is not on that sheet of paper. So can I tell my story?
I was just about to say, you've got a story where this kind of came into clear focus for you.
Do you guys remember when The Passion of Christ came out? And it was brand new, it hadn't hit the theaters yet, and they were talking about how violent it was. And so we knew as a church we wanted to rent a bunch of theaters in the Chesterfield Valley, but we knew we had to come up with a ruling on we don't recommend it for children under a certain age. So we got 4 moms together of different age kids, and we went to watch The Passion of the Christ. And then we were gonna have a meeting afterwards and come back with a verdict to the church of this is what we recommend. Children under this age should not go see Passion of the Christ.
Right.
So we see Passion of the Christ. We did not have a meeting afterwards.
I was going to say, Jude, I remember when I saw that movie, there was maybe like 100 people in the theater, and no one spoke to each other to the car. It was
We did
silent.
not speak. We all left. We didn't even say we're not meeting. We all left, got in our cars, and drove away. And the next day when we did talk, it wasn't about the Passion of the Christ. It wasn't about the age of kids. You know what it was about? What did you do when you left the theater? And the first mom said, I went home and I had to make my homemade spaghetti sauce because I experienced God when I cooked for my family. I just wept and cooked my spaghetti sauce. The next mom said, I went down, I had to get on all 4s and I had to touch my children. I played and wrestled with my children all night because I had to experience God through my children. The next woman went in a rocking chair in the dark and knit for hours. She just rocked and knit. She said, because I experience God when I create with my hands. And what did I do? I ran. I went home. It was dark. I didn't care. I needed to run because I experience my Jesus when I run. It's not about fitness for me.
Yeah.
It's a primary pathway. It's how I connect with the Father.
Right.
So I tell people, your primary way, you probably know what it is, and you've almost dismissed it
That's a great way
and
of saying
said,
it.
it's just a hobby, or it's just something I like to do. He's probably wired you that way. I have a lot of photographers tell me my primary way, because I see God through the lens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it could be transformational when you start to invite God into that, right? You have another pathway besides the running's a big one for you, but what's the other one?
Well, the one that has really sparked recently. Well, do you want me to do the activism one, or
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, yeah.
So the one on the thing is really activism, because I
yeah,
have to fight for justice, and it's been torture during COVID, because I volunteer to help with survivors of sex trafficking, and it has been torture not being allowed to go see them. And so in December, we got to do an outdoor scavenger hunt with them, and it is like the Lord filled my soul.
Yeah.
Because I got to experience Him through these girls.
Yeah, and then do tell us about the other one.
So the other one was, this just came about as a fluke. I loved arts and crafts as a kid. And just recently, he inspired it again. And it has become such a pathway for me for painting, and especially paint by numbers. So through this COVID, I have experienced Jesus through it so much. I did like 14 canvas paint by numbers.
Check this out. We've got like a couple quote originals by
These
Judy,
are all
paint by numbers.
They are. And
But look at
it's
that. That's
so
awesome.
there's something that happens when I can just paint. Those are all like $14 paint by numbers on Amazon.
Yeah, yeah.
And who knew that it would become a primary pathway
This
for
is
me
great.
where I connect with God?
Yeah, can I tell you just real quick a couple of
Yes.
my pathways?
Oh, yeah, you have some great ones.
So I'm a relational is one. So for me, even just getting a chance to sit and have a conversation with a friend and be here with people as we pull this off, this is I'm connecting with God as we do this. But the other one is creation, but even more specifically.
Go specific.
Because we love to go camping, we love to be outside,
You do.
hiking, fishing, that kind of stuff.
You do.
But if I'm sitting by a fire, like a fireplace, fire pit, campfire, I will just say, and God doesn't like to stay in a box for very long, so I'm not putting him on the spot if he decides to do things differently in the future, but I have had some of the most holy, tear-filled conversations with God around a fire.
Yep. So my question, if I was having a pastoral conversation with you, when's the last time you were around a fire?
Well, you know what? We put a fire in our fireplace all the time. And so we've been doing that over the last couple weeks while we've been home with Christmas. But my friend was just reminding me that just maybe 2 weeks before Christmas, I got away for 2 days by myself to go camping and sat around a campfire because I had scheduled it and knew that it was something my soul needed as we headed into Christmas.
Yep.
So.
Yep, and I would ask you, once you figure out what it is, I would look at your calendar and start being very strategic.
Well, that goes back, Judy, to what I was saying. When all the noise was going on in the message, one of the things I said that some people might not have heard is you have to make it a once a day or one day a week or 1 week in a month kind of thing. And it's one thing to put it on the schedule, but if you put it on the schedule, you might do it once. You have to cultivate this rhythm where it just becomes a part of what you do.
Which is why it's typically something you love to do anyway.
Yep.
It shouldn't be a chore.
Yeah.
It's how the Lord's wired you to connect with Him. It should be something that brings you joy.
That's right. So I love how creative and inventive we get with this, right? And we get to explore our own.
And experiment. Try different things. Try everything on that list. Try different things. Because, as you'll find out in a second, you never know.
You never know.
Lord
and
could
so
surprise you.
We've got a great story. We were like, Judy and I were talking, we were like, who could we talk to a little bit about a kind of a unique spiritual pathway that might just be an interesting angle on this, and we can learn more by talking to somebody. And you know who we settled on?
My better half.
That's right, Judy's husband. So Steve West is here on the midweek.
Good to be here.
Who'd have thought? It's so good to have you.
Who'd have thought?
Thanks so much, Steve, for being a part of
you're
this.
welcome.
And we've heard now for years, those who've taken explorations or heard Judy teach, we've heard her side of the story, and now this is your chance to just tell your side of the story. No, it's specifically,
What part?
really putting you on the spot, right? Specifically, I'd love to hear your version of what was it like when you guys first started coming to the crossing?
It was much different. I mean, everyone's heard Jude's story.
Yeah.
I was working a lot. And when I mean a lot, I'm talking 100 hours, 120 hours a week. I could barely stay awake. I was just trying to survive those years. So I came to the crossing. I could take coffee, had great music. I didn't have to dress up. All those things were great. And slowly over those years, I started saying, you know what, I need to connect with God again. I'd been a Christian beforehand, you know, but I was a nominal Christian. So
Well, you were and so just to paint the picture a little bit more, you were doing a surgical residency, and so when you're talking about those kinds of hours, I have heard you and I've heard other people who are doctors say that this is a season of life where it's intense. But during that season, there was a little bit of a disconnect in terms of your spiritual journey.
there is. I mean, we talk about pedestals. I mean, the career was the pedestal, and that just everything went into that. Somewhat by necessity, but also our egos feed into that too. I mean, I say it's necessity, but you still prioritize that over everything else. I remember doing it.
Yeah. And so in all of that, like, how would you describe spiritually? Like, you were saying you were tired all the time. You just didn't really have time for it. Or you felt
I
like you
didn't take time for it.
You didn't make time for it.
I didn't make
right.
time for it.
Yeah. But in the midst of all of that, at some point, you started to realize, to some extent, I've got to take some time for myself, or I've got to do something to come up for air. And you kind of reconnected with a hobby of yours that you're kind of passionate about.
I did, and it was actually I didn't reconnect. I developed a hobby, which is surprising. I grew up
wow.
not liking anything. I ate meat and potatoes and everything like that. I ran a lot, but that's sort of what I did. And that was, but I found it, you know what, if I spent hours in the kitchen, initially it would just calm me down. It would let me relax and sort of almost recharge for the upcoming week.
Yeah. And so you start to develop this kind of enjoyment of cooking.
Absolutely.
And you're in the kitchen and you're doing this. And then eventually the residency ends and life settles down a little bit.
Sure.
And now you're going, okay, I need to now reconnect with God. I've got to figure out what this relationship with him is going to look like. My wife has been on this spiritual journey, and so I need to do this. And tell us how God connected that with your passion.
Sure. I mean, not only was my wife on a spiritual journey, she was on staff. So,
Yeah.
you know, by the end of the residency, I sensed that God was calling us not only to stay here, but to really, you know, make him part of our lives, not just a figure out there. And it's at that point that I started, you know, sort of not leaning into cooking. That doesn't sound right. But having said that, I started saying, you know what, this is just more than just cooking. It's not like me putting food on the table for the family or something like that. It's having people over. It's connecting in those ways. I have very similar spiritual pathways as you, relation and creation. And cooking was a way to get the relational part of that going. A little bit more than that, though, too, because it was sensing God while I was doing it, as opposed to just doing it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally makes sense, because now you're pulling together a bunch of different things. You've got this passion for being in the kitchen, but on top of that, you have this spiritual gift of hospitality that God's cultivating in you, and now He's making this a pathway where you've got the relational pathway going on. You've got people in the house. You're feeding them food. You're in the kitchen. You're doing your thing. And you begin to experience God's presence.
Yeah.
And what I love about that, Steve, is that when you talk about the season where you were in the residency, is even though you might have been putting God on the back burner during that season, he kept pursuing you.
You know, it's striking because when I look at just how I grew up, the fact that I'd be talking about cooking at all is I know God has a sense of humor because there's no way that someone who wouldn't eat anything would ever develop some sort of love of the kitchen and food.
Yeah, well, and just to set the record straight, you are an amazing cook. I mean, I've been the beneficiary of being able to be at your house and eat some of the stuff that you've put together, and we're not making this up. He's actually really, you're a great cook.
Better than most restaurants.
Yeah, and so it's so fun to get to enjoy that. And you even have, we didn't talk about this earlier, but you even have a little bit of a tradition with an annual meal centered around a holiday, right? But
it is.
Can you just tell us what is that tradition?
Well, the tradition, if I'm getting it right, is Easter. At Easter, for years, you know, growing up, I mean, in St. Louis, we didn't have family here, so we started inviting orphans over, and that's part of the relationship part of it.
Yeah.
You know, we're celebrating Jesus, we're celebrating, the crucifixion, but we're also having people that don't have their family around. And so we started developing where each year we'd have a meat that we call it a mystery meat, where it's a meat that you typically wouldn't find anywhere. And sometimes, there've been some interesting ones over the years, but there's always lamb, And there's always a mystery meat.
Yep.
And then you make your guests kind of guess.
We
what
make
the
our
mystery
guests
meat
kind
is.
of guess.
It's so great.
Most of the time it's good, but sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's hit or miss. That's great. I want to ask you one more question,
Sure.
and this is a tough one, so forgive me for putting you on the
Sure.
spot. But when you're in that kitchen and you're doing your thing, and people are coming over for dinner, and what is that experience of connecting with God in that moment? How would you describe what you're experiencing there?
That's a difficult question, but when everything's working right, which I feel like there's a flow, there's like a dance that almost goes on. And Greg's talked about sometimes, with the relationships and stuff like that. But I feel like that, even from the time of, hey, planning the menu and going to get the food. I know it sounds crazy, but that's it.
Yeah. I mean, you're all over a really big theological idea about dancing with God, because there are early Christian writers that would describe the Trinity as the Father, Son, and Spirit in a dance, an eternal dance together. And then our relationship is that we're invited to join in with that. And so there's something really, really holy about what you just said. So I just thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, I know for all of us that have gotten a chance to be a benefit of that, I know during this season, and we're going to run out of time here, but I still want you to tell this story. So maybe you guys will hang in with us for just an extra minute. But in this season of COVID, this gift of cooking and being in the kitchen and sharing it with people has kind of been dampered a little bit for you.
Yeah.
Right?
How many months ago, there was a moment during COVID where we have a great marriage, but there was a little tension moment. And I remember standing in the kitchen having a conversation. What it boiled down to was we realized he wasn't able to use his spiritual pathways. And then we had a conversation and said, no more. We're going to get creative and we're going to figure it out, because it goes back to your heart being stale. Something's wrong when you can't live out your spiritual pathway. And I saw that in my husband. And we had to figure out, how can he now reconnect?
Well, and we were talking about this earlier, and as soon as you guys had that conversation and you started to figure out a plan for how you were going to reconnect with that, what did you say? Like, as soon as that happened?
Just, I felt different. I felt better,
Yeah,
I just, you almost feel relieved. And I know that sounds there, but it's almost like,
Yeah.
like that noise is gone.
You're going to reconnect. That's it.
The noise is gone.
That's it. That's it. Awesome. Steve, thanks so much for talking to us about this. So good, so good. So here's the thing, guys, as we now kind of wrap up and as we head into a new year, this is one of the ways we get to say together, Jesus, you are in charge. You are the authority. You get the first word in my life and the final say-so, and I'm committing to paying attention to you as the authority of my life this year. And as we learn to unplug, but then plug into these new things, it helps us to reestablish that connection in our relationship with God. So in Malachi chapter 3, there's this little passage where God is talking to his people, and he's actually talking to them about the idea of tithing, which was a very important part of their worship in Israel as the people of God. And he's saying, listen, this is a way in which I'm calling you to worship, and I'm challenging you to be faithful to this. And then look at what he says to them. He says, test me in this, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and throw out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. So as you seek him in 2021, may God open the floodgates of heaven for you. May you experience so much blessing in your relationship with him that you can't contain it. God bless you, and we'll see you guys this weekend.